I knew something inside my life had shattered the moment my own son raised his hand at me. The sting on my cheek faded, but the crack it carved through my heart did not. In that silence afterward, standing in the doorway of the home I once believed was safe, I understood a truth I never wanted to face. Sometimes, the greatest betrayal does not come from strangers, but from the people we once trusted with our whole lives. And as I closed that door behind me, hearing quiet celebration in the next room, I realized my world would never be the same. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to share where you're watching from. We love seeing how our stories bring people together from every corner of the world. Your thoughts and comments are what make this community so special, and we're truly grateful to have you here. If you have not already, do not forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story filled with drama, resilience, and unexpected twists. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and maybe grab your favorite drink because this is a tale you will not want to miss. Let us get started. My name is Margaret Collins, though everyone calls me Maggie, and at 66 years old, I have grown accustomed to the quiet rhythm of my days. Most mornings begin the same way. I stand at the kitchen counter with the pale Florida sunlight pouring through the windows, waiting for the coffee maker to finish its gentle dripping. The aroma fills the house, settling into the old wooden beams, the way memories settle into a life. After breakfast, I usually open the glass door leading to the back deck and step outside to greet the breeze drifting in from Clearwater Bay. The gulls circle overhead, calling out like impatient neighbors, and the water glimmers with that soft silver tint that always made my late husband, Harold, pause and smile. This house was our dream long before it became our address. We spent decades saving for it, first in a tiny rental near downtown Tampa, then in a modest apartment closer to the hospital where I worked as a nurse. Every spare dollar went into a jar we jokingly labeled Bay House Fund. When we finally signed the papers, we stood in the empty living room holding hands, marveling that two people who once struggled to afford new sneakers could now own a view of the water. Harold built the wooden dock behind the house himself, plank by plank. I can still picture him, tanned arms steady, humming old jazz while fitting each board into place. After his passing 5 years ago, the house became more than shelter. It became the last place where his presence felt real. His armchair still sits in the living room, the fabric worn at the elbows. The framed wedding photo still hangs beside the bookshelf. Sometimes I touch the glass without meaning to, as if I could reach through it and feel his warmth one more time. I know it is sentimental, but when one has lost someone dear, sentiment becomes a kind of anchor. My days follow a predictable sequence. I water the hibiscus plants and trim the herbs Harold once insisted would never survive, Florida heat. Around noon, I prepare a small meal, often a simple salad or soup. Later, I might read on the deck or walk the path along the shoreline. In the evenings, I check the news, open an old album, and sometimes video call my granddaughter, Lily. She is 9 years old, bright as a firefly, and asks questions that make me laugh. Being her grandmother is a joy that softens even the loneliest nights. My son Daniel and his wife Brooke live about 20 minutes away. Daniel works in sales for a medical equipment company and carries himself with the confidence of someone who believes every room is waiting for his entrance. Brooke is a real estate agent who prides herself on maintaining a polished image. I try to be kind to her, though there are moments when I sense she sees me more as an obligation than family. Still, when it comes to Lily, there is no doubt about the affection between us. The only person who knows my inner world is my neighbor, Asha Patel. She is 72, sharp, dignified, and wonderfully blunt. We drink tea together at least twice a week. She listens without judging, and her presence gives me a quiet reassurance that I am not navigating aging alone. I knew something inside my life had shattered the moment my own son raised his hand at me. The sting on my cheek faded, but the crack it carved through my heart did not. In that silence afterward, standing in the doorway of the home I once believed was safe, I understood a truth I never wanted to face. Sometimes, the greatest betrayal does not come from strangers, but from the people we once trusted with our whole lives. And as I closed that door behind me, hearing quiet celebration in the next room, I realized my world would never be the same. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to share where you're watching from. We love seeing how our stories bring people together from every corner of the world. Your thoughts and comments are what make this community so special, and we're truly grateful to have you here. If you have not already, do not forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story filled with drama, resilience, and unexpected twists. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and maybe grab your favorite drink because this is a tale you will not want to miss. Let us get started. The afternoon had been unusually quiet, the kind of calm that settles over Clearwater Bay after a string of restless nights. I was sitting on the back porch with a book open on my lap. Though my eyes had drifted far beyond its pages, the water shimmered beneath the sun, and a warm breeze rustled through the palm fronds. It should have been a peaceful moment, yet something in the stillness felt off, as if the day were holding its breath. That was when the phone rang. Daniel's name lit up the screen. His voice, usually infused with a confident ease, carried an edge I had not heard before. He told me their roof had been damaged in the recent storm and repairs would be expensive. There was a quickness in his words, a tightness beneath them that made my heart shift uneasily. Before I could respond, Brooke's voice rose faintly in the background, cheerful and bright, insisting that staying with me for a little while would be good for everyone. The phrasing felt rehearsed, too smooth, yet I pushed the unease aside. I told them they were welcome, because that was what a mother was supposed to say. When their car pulled into my driveway the following week, I expected a few suitcases. Instead, the trunk and back seat were packed full. Bins, clothing racks, boxes labeled kitchen, and enough decorative pillows to stage a model home. Daniel moved with a hurried focus, avoiding my eyes when I asked whether the repairs were worse than he first believed. Brooke drifted from room to room, glancing at walls, measuring spaces with her gaze, as if she were already imagining something different taking shape here. She complimented the house generously, but each remark carried an undercurrent of critique. She mentioned that the living room needed a modern touch, the kitchen could be brighter, and the hallway felt too traditional. I told myself she meant well. Still, when she gently moved my wedding photo to a lower shelf and replaced it with a ceramic bowl she brought from home, something inside me tightened. That evening came the suggestion about the bedrooms. Brooke spoke in an airy tone about how much natural light the larger room had and how it would be wonderful for Lily's creativity. I nodded, even as my chest grew heavy. That room held every memory of Harold and the life we built. I had never considered sleeping anywhere else, yet I agreed because it felt wrong to deny a child something she might love. Still, when I folded my blankets in the smaller room that night, a wave of loneliness settled over me. Daniel's next proposal came casually, almost dismissively. He offered to switch all the household bills to online accounts so he could handle them for me. He said it would spare me the trouble of sorting envelopes, but his eagerness to take control left me unsettled. I agreed, though my hesitation must have shown because for a moment he looked irritated, as if he expected compliance without question. Over the next few days, subtle remarks kept surfacing. Daniel mentioned the rising property values along the bay and how fortunate it was that the house is such a valuable asset. Brooke, while scrolling through her phone, added that some views are worth holding on to forever. I tried to dismiss these comments, yet each one scratched lightly at my peace. The unease deepened when I noticed a photo Brooke posted online. It showed my living room, freshly tidied by her, with a caption that read, "Someday this will be ours completely." The words stung more than I expected. They felt careless, presumptuous, and alarmingly confident. That evening, I walked across the street to visit my neighbor, Asha Patel. She listened quietly as I described the recent changes. She did not attempt to soften her concern. She simply told me to be careful, that financial exploitation of older adults often starts subtly. Her tone was calm but firm, and the seriousness of her words lingered long after I left. When night settled over the bay, I sat alone on the porch. The house, once a sanctuary of certainty, felt unfamiliar in a way I could not name. The air around me was still, yet beneath it, something trembled, as though the tide of my life was preparing to shift. If you're still watching and the tension is starting to pull you in deeper, please comment number 2 below so I know you're following along. Now let's continue with chapter 3. Saturday mornings had always carried a gentle rhythm for me. I woke before the others, letting the soft amber light spill into the kitchen as I prepared breakfast the way I used to when Harold was alive. The smell of coffee filled the room, rising in slow curls above the pot, and the quiet hum of the toaster added a simple comfort. I moved calmly, barefoot on the cool tile, believing the day would unfold like any other. Nothing in that peaceful moment hinted at what was about to happen. I had just set the plates on the counter when Daniel entered the kitchen. His expression was unusually stern, and in his hands was a thick folder of documents. He laid it on the table with a deliberate thud that disrupted the stillness of the morning. He announced that these were important papers from a lawyer he knew, documents he claimed every responsible family should have ready in case I became seriously ill or unable to manage my affairs. His tone was clipped, controlled, lacking the warmth that once came so naturally to him. A quiet unease unfurled inside me, but I tried to steady myself. When I reached for the folder, I could feel a tremor in my fingers. I opened it slowly, letting my eyes scan line after line of unfamiliar legal language. At first, it appeared to be what Daniel said, forms related to medical decisions and long-term care planning. But as I looked further, my breath caught. There were sections detailing the transfer of property rights and the granting of complete financial authority to Daniel and Brooke. Some lines even read as though ownership of the house would shift automatically under certain vague conditions. The more I read, the colder my body felt, as if the kitchen's warm air had turned to ice. I asked Daniel to explain the clauses that did not match the words he used when he handed me the papers. His face tightened. Irritation flickered in his eyes. He told me I was overthinking, that I did not understand modern estate planning, that he was trying to protect the family. His voice grew sharper, slicing through the air. I told him gently but firmly that I would not sign anything without proper understanding. The tension between us thickened until the room felt too small for both of us. Then the shift happened. His frustration swelled into something harsher, something I had never seen in my son. He accused me of being stubborn, of jeopardizing Lily's future, of not appreciating all he was trying to do. I stepped back, startled by the heat in his words, and held the documents tighter. When I tried to pull them away from him, he grabbed the folder again. The movement was fast, rough, and the force of it knocked me off balance. My foot slipped on the smooth tile. My shoulder hit the cabinet first, then the side of my head struck the edge of the countertop. A burst of pain radiated through my skull. The world tilted sideways in a rush of bright light and muffled sound. I fell to the floor, tasting copper at the back of my mouth, hearing objects clatter around me. Brooke appeared in the doorway, but instead of rushing to help, she stood there with her phone in hand, observing the scene with cold detachment. She muttered something about older people being clumsy, as though she were rehearsing a line she intended to repeat later. The indifference in her posture cut deeper than the pain in my shoulder. Little Lily emerged next, her small form trembling as she watched me struggle to sit up. The fear in her eyes struck me harder than the fall. I forced myself to smile at her, though the throbbing in my head made the gesture painful. I wanted to reassure her, to pretend everything was normal, but the air had shifted too drastically. As I steadied myself against the cabinet and breathed through the pain, something inside me crystallized. Daniel's outburst was not a moment of stress. It was the unveiling of a truth I had been trying not to see. This was no longer a matter of personality differences or household tension. This was control. This was greed. And the house Harold and I had built together was at the center of it. Later, alone in the small bedroom I had unwillingly moved into, I examined the forming bruise on my shoulder and the faint swelling along my hairline. I pressed a hand to the tender skin, trying to make sense of the child I raised becoming a man capable of such harm. The realization was devastating, but it was also awakening. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine leaving my own home. I did not know how or when, but I knew I could no longer pretend we were still the family we once were. If you're still watching and you feel the storm beginning to build, please comment number 3 below to show me you're still here. Now, let's uncover Chapter 4. The morning after the fall greeted me with a dull, radiating ache that pulsed through my shoulder and into the side of my neck. When I opened my eyes, thin beams of Florida sunlight slipped through the curtains of the smaller bedroom, outlining the furniture in a way that made everything appear sharper, more defined. The bruises beneath my skin throbbed in protest as I pushed myself upright. For a moment, I stayed still, letting the weight of the previous day settle fully across my chest. It was no longer possible to tell myself that what happened had been an accident. Even so, I tried to steady my breath. I needed to stay calm for Lily's sake. I stepped out of the room slowly, holding the wall for balance. The house felt different now, as if some invisible pressure had crept into its structure overnight. In the living room, I found Daniel standing near the window, scrolling through his phone. I approached him with as much composure as I could manage and suggested that we tease. I wanted to address what had happened, to restore some kind of peace. I told him that any decisions about legal documents required time and clarity, that I needed to understand everything before agreeing to anything. Daniel's expression barely shifted, his arms folded over his chest in a posture that created distance instead of understanding. He insisted I was exaggerating what happened the day before. He dismissed the fall as a moment of clumsiness and implied that my caution bordered on paranoia. His tone carried an underlying impatience, as though the conversation itself were an inconvenience. Brooke soon entered the room, her footsteps soft, but her presence unmistakably firm. She offered a smile that never reached her eyes and commented that aging could make simple tasks feel overwhelming. She suggested that allowing them to manage the household would relieve my stress. The way she spoke made me feel like a fragile object rather than the woman who had run a household, raised a child, and cared for countless patients during long shifts at the hospital. I retreated from the conversation with a silent ache spreading through my chest. Wanting to reclaim something familiar, I walked toward the living room shelves and carefully lifted my wedding photo back to the place it had always belonged. For a fleeting moment, placing that frame on its rightful spot returned a bit of steadiness to me. But when I passed by again later, the frame had been moved back down to a lower shelf, replaced once more by Brooke's decorative pieces. The sight made something inside me sink. It was as if pieces of my life were being quietly rearranged without my consent. Seeking comfort, I sat beside Lily at the dining table while she colored in a small sketchbook. Her shoulders were hunched, as though she were trying to make herself smaller. I asked gently if she felt all right. She hesitated, her crayon pausing mid-stroke, before murmuring that everything felt strange in the house. Her quiet honesty pierced me deeper than any bruise. I reached out to brush a strand of hair away from her face, wishing I could shield her from all of this. As the days passed, subtle but disturbing changes began appearing. The cabinet where I kept my important documents was locked. When I asked about it, Daniel offered vague explanations and brushed away my concern. The wireless internet password suddenly stopped working, and when I inquired, Daniel vaguely claimed he was working on security updates. Each alteration seemed minor on the surface, but together they created the unmistakable impression of tightening control. One afternoon, Brooke approached me with a revised set of documents. She said they had simplified everything. I sat at the kitchen table and reviewed them carefully, only to discover that the language still granted them extensive authority. Brooke maintained a polite expression, yet her eyes betrayed irritation when I slid the papers back without signing. I escaped to the shoreline shortly afterward. The wind was gentle, and the scent of salt carried memories of walks I once shared with Harold. The water shimmered, but even its beauty could not dissolve the knot forming in my stomach. I realized the situation was no longer a misunderstanding or a rough patch. It was deliberate. It was growing. That night, staring at the faint bruise on my cheek in the mirror, I felt something shift within me. I saw weariness, but beneath it, a spark of resolve. The gentle approach was no longer enough. If I wanted to protect myself and the home Harold and I built, I would need to summon a strength I had not called on in years. If you're still watching and every turn is keeping you hooked, please comment number 4 below to let me know you're staying with this story. Now let's step into chapter 5. The days that followed my fall slipped by in a heavy, unsettling haze. The house, once the warm refuge Harold and I built with our own hands, now felt like it was holding its breath. Every corner seemed to echo with tension. Daniel and Brooke moved around the rooms with an air of ownership rather than temporary guests. They held whispered conversations behind closed doors, carried folders in and out of the office, and shut laptops whenever I entered the room. Their guarded behavior created a steady pulse of dread beneath my skin, as if danger were quietly tightening its grip. One morning, while walking through the hallway, I noticed the drawer where I kept my financial documents slightly ajar. I knew I had closed it the night before inside. The folders were shifted out of order, and a letter from the bank was missing. The sight struck me like cold water. I stood there for a long moment, gripping the edge of the drawer, fighting the panic rising in my throat. I could no longer avoid the truth. They were reaching deeper than I had allowed myself to believe. A slow, deliberate calm settled over me. I walked into the living room where Daniel sat with his laptop open on the coffee table. His eyes stayed on the screen even when I stepped directly in front of him. I asked him about the missing papers, about the way the bills were being redirected, and about what was happening to my accounts. My voice was steady, but every muscle in my body was rigid. Daniel finally looked up. His expression was hard and unyielding, as if some veil had fallen away. He spoke with certainty, asserting that the financial responsibilities should be in his hands. Now, he said, I was aging, that modern systems were too complicated, that it was easier for everyone if he handled everything. His tone carried no warmth, only superiority. It was the first time he had spoken to me as though I were a burden. Brooke entered, as if she had been waiting for her cue. Her arms were crossed lightly, her posture relaxed in a way that contradicted the coldness in her gaze. She suggested that older adults often misunderstand things, that my anxiety was unnecessary. Her voice had a sugary smoothness to it, but each word dripped with the implication that I was incompetent. Then she remarked, almost casually, that this house was too much responsibility for someone my age. Their words pressed against me like weight on my chest. I felt the room growing smaller, the air denser. I took a breath and told them that I would be consulting a lawyer before signing anything further, a simple sentence, spoken softly, yet it cut through the room with far more impact than I expected. Daniel's face changed instantly. His jaw tightened, his nostrils flared, and a red flush crept along his neck. He slammed his laptop shut with a force that made the table rattle. Papers scattered across the floor like startled birds. The suddenness of his movement sent a jolt through me, but I held my ground. His anger surged, radiating off him in waves that made the air feel electric. He stepped closer, towering over me, his posture rigid and threatening. I sensed Brooke just behind him, her expression sharp and cold, as if she were assessing the situation rather than reacting emotionally. She did not step forward to de-escalate. Instead, she watched as though the confrontation was not only expected, but desired. Above us, a soft gasp broke through the tension. I looked up and saw Lily standing at the top of the stairs, her small hands gripping the railing, her face pale with fear. Her presence pierced me with a pain deeper than any bruise. She should never have witnessed this darkness in her own home, much less mine. Daniel glanced up and saw her too, but instead of softening, his annoyance deepened. The sight confirmed something inside me. The line had been crossed, not just for me, but for her. The man in front of me was not the boy I once raised. I turned away and climbed the stairs slowly, every step heavy yet filled with a new clarity. In the safety of my small bedroom, I closed the door and pressed a hand to my chest. My reflection in the mirror showed exhaustion, a faint bruise, and eyes shadowed with sorrow. But beneath all of that was something stronger: resolve. The conflict was no longer avoidable. Whatever came next would require courage I had not called upon in years. But I knew one thing with certainty: I would not allow them to take what remained of my life's work. The battle had begun, and I was done being silent. Sleep never truly came to me that night. I drifted in and out of shallow, uneasy seas, each one interrupted by flashes of the confrontation in the living room, by the image of Daniel towering over me, and by the quiet terror I saw in Lily's eyes. When the weak morning light finally seeped the tears through the curtains, it brought no comfort. It only revealed the tightness in my chest, the heaviness in my limbs, and the realization that I could no longer pretend life in this house was bearable. I sat up slowly, my body stiff from tension rather than age. The small bedroom felt even smaller in the cold morning light. The air was still, thick, almost suffocating. It was as if the room itself sensed the shift inside me and was waiting to see what I would do next. My heart beat in a steady, anxious rhythm as I listened to faint voices coming from downstairs. Daniel and Brooke were murmuring in the kitchen, their tones low but hurried. I could not make out the words, but the cadence suggested planning, calculation, and something far from innocent. I paused at the top of the stairs, unseen, letting the sound wash over me. They were no longer hiding their intentions. They had simply stopped caring whether I sensed them. Gathering my strength, I descended the stairs. When I entered the kitchen, both of them fell silent. Daniel looked at me with an expression that was neither welcoming nor ashamed. His eyes skimmed over me, as if assessing a problem to be managed. Brooke offered a thin smile while setting plates on the table, her movements too precise to be casual. For a moment, standing there, I felt like an intruder in the house Harold and I had poured our lives into. The tension broke when Daniel announced that they had been discussing adjustments to the living space. He said it calmly, almost casually, as if it were a reasonable suggestion. He mentioned clearing out some of my belongings to make the house more organized, and hinted that I should consider what would best support the future of the family. His words were carefully arranged, but their meaning was unmistakable. Each one was a reminder that they did not see me as the owner of this home anymore. I did not respond. My silence was the only shield I had, so I held it tightly. Instead, I stepped outside onto the wooden deck, letting the sound of the waves steady me. The morning was cool, the breeze gentle, the horizon painted in soft colors, but the tranquility no longer reached me the way it used to. Even the bay seemed distant now, as though it sensed that I was no longer safe here. I leaned against the railing and whispered Harold's name in my thoughts. He had always promised that this house would be our peace, our legacy, something no one could take from us. I wondered what he would tell me to do now. I knew the answer before I finished forming the question. He would want me to protect myself, even if it meant stepping away from the home we built. Footsteps approached softly. Lily slipped onto the deck, her sketch pad tucked under her arm. She did not speak. She simply sat beside me, her small shoulder leaning gently against mine. After a moment, she reached for my hand. The simple gesture sent a surge of emotion through me, tightening my throat. I could not let her think this chaos was normal. I could not let her grow up watching cruelty go unchallenged. As the wind brushed against us, I finally understood what I had been avoiding. I had two choices: stay and continue shrinking within my own walls, or leave and face the fight that awaited me. The thought of walking away from my home filled me with sorrow, so deep it almost broke me. But the idea of staying, of letting Daniel raise his voice again, of allowing Brooke to erase traces of my life piece by piece, was unbearable. I straightened slowly, feeling a clarity settle over me. I would leave. I would seek help. I would not be one of those older adults whose lives were dismantled in silence, not after everything Harold and I had worked for, not with Lily watching from the sidelines, learning from my choices. When I stepped back inside, Daniel and Brooke turned to look at me. They sensed something had shifted, though they could not name it. I felt the strength in my posture, the resolve in my breath. For the first time in weeks, I felt like myself again. I said nothing. I did not need to. The choice had already been made. If you're still watching and you can feel the weight of this turning point, please comment number 6 below, so I know you're here with me. Now let's move on to chapter 7. The next morning, the house felt strangely muted, as if someone had draped a heavy blanket over every surface. The tension from the night before no longer crackled openly in the air, but something colder had taken its place. It was the kind of silence that followed a storm, not peaceful, but watchful. As I stepped out of my room, I could feel 2 pairs of eyes tracking my movements from somewhere beyond the hallway. Nothing was said, yet everything spoke. My body ached, especially my shoulder where I had fallen, but the pain inside me ran deeper. The home where I once felt Harold's presence in every wall now seemed foreign. I moved through the space like a visitor, instead of the woman who had lived here for decades. Memories rose uninvited, mornings filled with laughter, dinners shared by candlelight, soft conversations on the porch. Each memory clashed painfully with the present atmosphere, reminding me of how far things had shifted. Daniel had already begun tightening his grip in subtle but unmistakable ways. The internet password had changed again. The mail was stacked neatly on the counter, but opened without my permission. A few documents I had left on the dining table were gone, only to be found later stored in a drawer I rarely used. The small disruptions might have appeared harmless to an outsider, but I saw the pattern clearly. It was control, methodical, and escalating. Brooke worked differently. She drifted through the rooms, replacing items she considered outdated. New cushions appeared on the sofa. A bright rug I had never seen lay across the hallway. My favorite ceramic vase, the one Harold bought for our 20th anniversary, disappeared from its usual spot. I found it shoved behind cleaning supplies under the sink. The sharp ache that bloomed in my chest when I pulled it out was almost physical. It felt like they were slowly erasing the life Harold and I had built. I avoided the living room and spent most of my time upstairs, not out of fear, but because being near them drained the last bits of warmth inside me. I needed strength now more than ever, and I could not gather it in a place filled with their shadows. In that quiet space, I tried to gather my thoughts and determine my next steps. My resolve had not weakened. In fact, every new act of intrusion hardened it. Later that afternoon, I heard their voices from the kitchen. The tone was low and urgent. I paused in the hallway, not to spy, but because the words drifted out sharp enough to reach me. They spoke about moving things along and finalizing the process. I could not grasp every detail, but I understood enough to know that time was no longer on my side. Whatever they were planning, it involved my home, my assets, and perhaps even stripping me of decision-making authority. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the draft creeping under the back door. I went to my room and began packing quietly. I chose only the things that truly mattered. The small framed photograph from our wedding day, Harold's pocket watch, my journal, a few important papers, and enough clothing for a short absence. Folding each item felt like saying goodbye to a version of my life I once believed would last forever. Lily appeared in my doorway, her expression troubled. She did not ask questions. She simply stepped forward and wrapped her arms around me. The soft weight of her head against my arm nearly broke me. I whispered that everything would be all right, though the words trembled with uncertainty. She nodded, believing me in the way only children can, and it strengthened my resolve. That night, I passed by Daniel's office and heard him on the phone. His voice was steady and confident as he assured someone that everything would be settled soon. The finality in his tone struck me harder than any argument ever could. If I stayed, I would lose far more than my home. I would lose the last pieces of myself. Back in my room, the moonlight spilled across the floor. I sat on the edge of the bed with the packed bag at my feet. My hands shook slightly, but my heart felt strangely calm. I knew what I had to do. I would leave, not because I was defeated, but because leaving was the first step in taking my life back. I left the house just after sunrise, moving quietly through the hallway with the bag I had packed the night before. Daniel and Brooke were somewhere in the back rooms, their voices faint behind closed doors. I did not pause to listen. The moment my hand touched the doorknob, a tremor went through me, a mixture of grief and resolve. Stepping outside felt like crossing an invisible threshold. The air was cool, and for the first time in weeks, I could breathe without feeling watched. Driving down the familiar road along the bay, I realized how different everything looked. The water shimmered in the early light. The pine trees leaned gently in the breeze, and yet none of it soothed me the way it once did. The beauty only made the turmoil inside me more pronounced. I glanced at the rearview mirror several times, half expecting Daniel's truck to appear, though I knew it was irrational. The further I drove, the more distance I put between myself and their control, and with it came a fragile sense of safety. I stopped at a small parking lot near the coastal park and sat in the car for several minutes. My hands trembled slightly as I opened my bag and looked through the items I had taken. Harold's pocket watch, our wedding photograph, my journal, a few important documents. They felt like pieces of a life I was trying desperately to preserve. For a moment, staring at them, I wondered if leaving the house meant losing everything. The ache in my chest nearly convinced me to turn back. Instead, I called Mrs. Patel. Her voice on the other end was firm in its concern. She told me to come to her home immediately, and the steadiness in her tone grounded me. Driving to her neighborhood, I felt a thin thread of hope pulling me forward. Her home was warm, filled with bright fabrics and the scent of cardamom. She welcomed me inside with a look that said she already understood more than I had spoken. Sitting at her dining table, I told her everything. The words came slowly, weighted and painful, but releasing them made the burden lighter. She listened with the seriousness the situation deserved. When I finished, She handed me the name and number of an attorney experienced in protecting older adults from financial manipulation. That referral alone felt like a lifeline. By late afternoon, I found myself in a small, cluttered law office across town. The attorney, Marlene Crawford, examined my documents with such sharp attention. Her questions were direct, leaving no space for uncertainty. With every answer I gave, the shape of what Daniel had been doing became clearer and more dangerous. Before I left, she outlined the first steps to protect myself. Her confidence settled something inside me that had been shaking for too long. Walking out into the warm glow of sunset, I held my bag close. I was frightened, exhausted, and grieving, but no longer lost. I had a direction now, and I intended to follow it. If you're still watching and you're ready to see how everything comes together, please comment number 8 below to let me know you're still with me. Now let's step into the final chapters and uncover the ending. Several weeks passed after I left the house, and during that time, my life slowly settled into a different rhythm. I stayed with Mrs. Patel, whose home offered a gentleness I had not felt in a long while. The small guest room became a temporary sanctuary where I could finally sleep through the night. My body healed, and the fog of fear that had lingered for weeks began to lift. Meanwhile, the legal process moved forward. Under Marlene Crawford's guidance, formal notices were sent to Daniel ordering him to halt all interference with my accounts. Certain financial records were frozen for protection, and a petition detailing his actions was submitted to the local court. When the temporary protective order was granted, I felt a small but meaningful shift inside me. It was the first official acknowledgement that what I had endured was real and unacceptable. Daniel's anger arrived in the form of emails filled with frustration. I did not read them in full. Marlene handled everything, shielding me from the worst of it. Brooke attempted a softer approach, but I did not respond to her either. Each message only confirmed how necessary my escape had been. The day I appeared in court, my hands trembled, but my resolve did not. I let Marlene speak on my behalf while I focused on breathing steadily. I did not look at Daniel once. When the judge restored full control of my home and assets to me and ordered Daniel to vacate the property, relief washed over me in a wave so strong it nearly brought me to tears. Returning to the house was emotional. It was quiet, almost painfully so, but the silence no longer carried threat. I moved through each room, placing items back where they belonged. When I set Harold's photograph on the mantel again, it felt like reclaiming a part of my soul. Life did not return to what it once was, but it began to grow in new and steady ways. Lily visited often, bringing color and joy into the house. I joined a local art class and a book club, discovering small pockets of healing. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the bay, I stood on the porch and breathed in the calm. The world felt wide again, full of possibilities. I knew the road ahead would not be perfect, but it would be mine. The morning light drifted gently across the surface of the bay as I sat on the porch with a warm cup of tea resting between my hands. For the first time in months, the quiet around me was truly peaceful. The air no longer carried dread. Instead, it held possibility. I felt different too, steadier, clearer, and no longer reduced by fear. Looking back on what I had endured brought a bittersweet ache. The deepest wound had never been the threat to my home, but the knowledge that my own son had been willing to harm me. Accepting that truth had nearly broken me, yet it had also forced me to rise, to reclaim my voice, and to protect the life Harold and I had built. What sustained me were the people who showed genuine kindness. Mrs. Patel, with her steady presence, Marlene with her sharp resolve, and Lily with her quiet love. They reminded me that even in betrayal, there are hands willing to lift you. I learned that age does not erase strength. It reshapes it. At 62, I found the courage to stand for myself and begin again. As the waves brushed gently against the shore, I stepped off the porch and walked toward the water. The world felt open, and I met it with calm determination. I was no longer afraid of what came next. In the quiet that follows hardship, life often reveals its deepest lessons. Sometimes the path back to peace is not found in holding on, but in the steady courage to let go of fear, of old wounds, and of the illusions we once clung to. Healing asks us to rise even when our hearts feel heavy, to remember that dignity is not something others can grant or take away. It is something we reclaim each time we choose ourselves. And with every sunrise, we are invited to begin again, gently, bravely, and without apology. Thank you for staying until the end of this story. If it moved you, inspired you, or reminded you of your own strength, I would love to hear your thoughts. Please share a comment, follow the page, and subscribe so you never miss the next journey we explore together.